Today we're going to talk about how to make a rough sketch of a function that's a quadratic. And one way to do that is to look at the function in factored form. So here's my function that I like to factor, x squared plus x minus 12. And the technique for factoring a trinomial is to first write it out as two sets of parentheses. And I know that the first two numbers, or variables, have to multiply out to give me x squared. I also know that the last two things that I put here have to multiply to negative 12. So there's lots of options for that. I mean, it could be negative 1 times 12. It could be positive 1 times negative 12. It could be negative 2 times 6, or positive 2 times negative 6. Or finally, it could be negative 3 times 4, or positive 3 times negative 4. And those are all the integers that could multiply to negative 12. But what we also need is for those two numbers to add to 1, because there's really a 1 here in front of the x. So I look through my options, and it looks like this pair adds to 1. So what that means is that this is negative 3, and this is positive 4. So our function in factored form is f of x equals x minus 3 times x plus 4. And here's what that means. We should now be able to figure out what the x-intercepts, or the zeros of this function, are because of the zero product property, which says that if you have a product that equals 0, either the first part of the product, which is x minus 3, either that equals 0, or the second part of the product, which is x plus 4, must equal 0. If I solve this equation for x, adding 3 to the other side gives me that x equals 3. If I solve the other equation for x, I will get that x is equal to negative 4. Now here's what those two things mean. What I've done is I've plugged in 0 for the y value. So I have a y value of 0, and I found that the x value is 3. That means I have an x-intercept over here at about 3. So I have a point. Then I also know that when I plugged in 0 for y, my x could have been negative 4. So it means over here, about negative 4, I'm going to have another point. Now, another thing we should look at is in the original function, it has a leading coefficient of 1, which is positive, so that means my u is going to be something like this. And just making a rough sketch, it's probably going to look something like this. You can see it's a very rough sketch, because it probably shouldn't be this oblong. So there's my graph of a rough sketch of my function f of x by looking at the factored form and finding the x-intercepts.